Hello, and welcome to Tell the Damn Story with veteran award-winning authors Alex Simmons and Christopher Ryan. On Tell the Damn Story, we celebrate the trials and tribulations, the challenges and joys of creativity, and hopefully, along the way, help you tell your own damn story.
That
right. is what we do here, and tonight, we're going to do it Halloween style. Isn't that right, Alex?
That's right. It's whatever style that is. We're going to be doing it that way.
We're so dedicated to Halloween that we brought not one, but two, count them, two special guest stars today. And we have with us from Horror Writers Association of New York, James Chambers and Carol Guyzander. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Well, welcome to everyone listening, and thank you for having us.
Hey, our pleasure. Our pleasure.
And just so both of you know, not only do we do it as a podcast, but we've gone YouTube, so they're going to be seeing you as well. Is that okay?
That's
I want to make sure you're not, wanted by the feds or anything.
It's a little late to tell them that because it's happening already. Sure.
Just, we're dotting those I's and crossing those T's.
Yeah, I'm glad I combed my hair.
He's glad he combed his hair. Yeah, okay.
Well, at least you have hair. Look at me. There you go. Alex, could you give us a little background on the Horror Writers Association, please?
I absolutely could. The Horror Writers Association is a nonprofit organization of writers and publishing professionals around the world dedicated to promoting dark literature and the interest of those who write it. As a matter of fact, HWA, Horror Writers Association, was formed in 1985, which is a great year, with the help of many of the field's greats, including Dean Kuntz, Robert McCammon, and I hope I pronounced that properly, Joe R. Lansdale, who's been on our show before. And today, with over 1,250 members in countries such as Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Costa Rica, Denmark, Germany, Honduras, India, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nicaragua, Russia, Spain, South Africa, Sweden, Taiwan, Thailand, Trinidad, the United Kingdom, and the United States. It is the oldest and most respected professional organization for the much-loved writers who have brought you the most enjoyable sleepless nights of your life.
There you go. There you go. And it's so big that it's broken into regional chapters, and we have the co-coordinators of the New York chapter, but we also have background on Horror Writers Association New York. Alex,
I'll be happy to read that to you. The New York chapter, the New York chapter of the Horror Writers Association consists of local authors of horror and dark literature. The chapter hosts monthly meetings on Long Island and in Manhattan to support the professional development and growth of our members. And they coordinate local events and networks with other writers, artists, editors, and publishers working in the genre. And some of those activities include sponsoring writing critique groups, staffing booths at local literature and pop culture events, and hosting public readings for members at local venues. Okay, so there you go.
Horror Writers Association New York didn't even let COVID defeat it. When they couldn't go out to meetings, they zoomed it up. And that's the only way I've really experienced HWA so far. There are two ways to experience HWA. If you are interested, both these fine representatives of horror will talk to you about maybe possibly becoming involved in HWA. But there's also a second feature.
What's that? What's that?
And they are the co-hosts. Carol and Jim are the co-hosts of Galactic Terrors, a YouTube show that is shown the second Thursday of every month at 8 o'clock, right?
Yes.
Yes.
New York time.
And they feature live readings from local horror authors. There's so much. I'm not sure where to start.
I know where to start.
Let's start with Alex.
Okay. So let's give Carol first, because that's how my mama raised me. Let's give Carol a moment to just say hello and maybe say just a couple of things about yourself, and then we'll give Jim the same opportunity. And that way folks get to hear your voices.
Excellent. Well, what fun. I'm delighted to be here with you guys. Y'all are so much fun, and I love listening to the show. I myself, I write horror, dark fiction, suspense stuff, and science fiction. I also edit the same for Writer Punk Press and other opportunities, which is very cool. I am usually to be found writing with my black cat, either Velcroed to my leg or on my lap. And if you hear her around here, you will know that this is an official online presentation because we will have had a cat. So.
Yes, got you.
Excellent.
Thank you for that.
Could I add a little bit to Carol?
Please.
Carol edited and appeared in Hideous Progeny and Merely This and Nothing More. Edgar Allan Poe goes punk. Classic horror goes punk. There's a few more. Shakespeare goes punk.
We'll definitely be talking about the punking here. We've got
these were all great collections of steampunk or other alternate versions of the classics. A lot of fun. But she also appears in The Lost Librarian's Grave, Tales of Madness, Horror, and Adventure, and Cat Ladies of the Apocalypse, which is, I just love your titles, Carol. These are fantastic. Hell's Mall. Also, What We've Unlearned, English Class Goes Punk, and on it goes. But there's one.
Well, okay, but we got to give Jim a
There's
chance.
one last one.
Okay, one last one. Go.
Trust me. Always trust me.
I'll
There's
try.
one that both are involved in. Both
No,
Carol
not
and
that.
Jim. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's correct.
What is that?
It's recently released Under Twin Suns, Alternate Histories of the Yellow Sign, the legendary. You know what? I'm going to let you guys talk about it because I get too spooked by it. But Carol has a story in it, and James edited that collection. So what a segue.
Excellent. So let's segue into James there.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great segue. Under Twin Suns, Alternate Histories of the Yellow Sign, an anthology that I edited for Hippocampus Press, who published it in June. And Carol has a story in that has been getting a lot of attention. And it's no surprise that Carol's story, The Yellow Crown, has been called out in several reviews of the book. It's a great story. And it also includes a really fantastic lineup of authors: John Langan, Karen Warren, Ann K. Schwader, and Linda Addison contributed poems. Tim Wagoner has a story in there. Daryl Schweitzer, Mark Abbott, Stephen Van Patten, Lisa Morton. So it's really, I had a blast editing that book, and the response has been great. And just earlier this week, it wound up featured in a roundup in the Washington Post by Michael Dirda of, Halloween themed, or not Halloween themed, but story collections perfect for Halloween. So we were really thrilled to see that. The book has been getting such a great response, and very happy with it. And just to backtrack a bit, I just want to say how relieved I was when you brought up background info on the HWANY, that it was legit background info and not where we've hidden all the bodies. I got a little nervous there. I was like, what are these guys?
Just the pieces, Jim, really.
There you go. Yes. Now Jim is underplaying himself, Alex, because
I know.
If you go to Amazon,
go for him. Yeah.
There's 34 different titles associated with one James Chambers. Of course, Under the Twin Suns, but the newly released, where did we put it? On Hierophant Road, which I just got the other day. I've just started. I'm about halfway through the first story, and I just clicked in, and I was like, "This is great." It's the rest of the night, and my sons came home, and then things happen. So I'm looking forward to getting back into it. And also, there's the Corpse Fauna series. These are just picking titles that I loved. 3 Chords of Chaos, a badass fairy tale. And then, of course, Jim, Alex is going to get excited about this stuff. You've handled some great characters.
Yeah.
The Spider.
Yep.
Green Hornet, which is one of Alex's favorites.
Yep.
And one of my all-time favorite characters, Kolchak, the Night Stalker. As a matter of fact, you have a new title coming out from Kolchak. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it came out over the summer. It's a kind of a new twist on Kolchak in that he teams up with a group of other pulp and pop culture characters, for, to sort of face the big evil, so something even bigger than Kolchak can handle on his own, but it's still very much a Kolchak story. It's got that Kolchak structure. Kolchak is the narrator, and it's a slightly altered version of the classic title. It's Kolchak and the Night Stalkers, the Faceless God. Yeah. And I love Kolchak, and he's one of my favorite characters to write, because his voice, his perspective, as I understand it, provides so much opportunity for fun dialogue, satirical commentary, just sort of, insights into, not to sound too heavy, but the human condition. But I've always seen Kolchak as, sort of he's a humanist, a cynical humanist in a way.
Yes.
Yeah. I've seen him as literally just a slightly extraordinary everyman. Yeah, because he is like, the clothing, everything about him is I'm just trying to keep it together kind of attitude about him, and yet I wouldn't go up against half the stuff he does.
Well, that's what makes him so memorable, and I think that's why his fan base has lasted. I mean, for people who aren't familiar with Kolchak.
Yes, I was hoping you would do that.
Oh yeah, he was an author named Jeff Rice, who passed away a few years ago, wrote The Night Stalker. And it was a novel featuring Kolchak, who is a kind of down on his luck journalist, who drank a lot more in the novel than he ever did on the TV show, except maybe for that first movie. And it was
that first movie. He did a lot more things than he did in the TV show.
And the first movie is called The Night Stalker, and it was produced by Dan Curtis. The teleplay was written by Richard Matheson. Tells you about the quality of the storytelling.
Yeah,
and it aired as a TV movie of the week in, I think, 1972 or 3.
Right.
And
that would work.
It was the highest rated TV movie ever at that time that it aired. Right. And so naturally they followed it with a sequel, The Knight Strangler, which was also written by Richard Matheson, and which is a very different story from The Night Stalker, but is just as good. And Jeff Rice wrote a follow-up novel, The Knight Strangler, based on that story. So it was a really kind of a weird, twisty thing there.
I like that.
Jeff Rice wrote the novel that was adapted for a TV movie. Then by Richard Matheson. Yeah. Then Matheson wrote The Knight Strangler, which Jeff Rice adapted for a novel. And all of this starring Darren McGavin as Kolchak, giving really one of the most iconic performances in television history, I think. And it led to a series in 1974, a TV series called Kolchak the Night Stalker, which lasted for 1 season. And the reason that it lasted for 1 season was because Darren McGavin was carrying the weight of the show on his own shoulders. He was acting uncredited as a producer. He was involved in the scripts. He was developing the character. He was doing a lot of things to make the show as great as it is, that the production team wasn't doing. So and at some point he got tired. And he decided, I'm going to go do other things. And
I don't think they understood what they had.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know offhand what the ratings were like for the series, if they were strong enough that it would have continued.
That was 1974, so it was only 2 years after the original film. It's very. I remember
72, and then the second film 73, and then they did the one series.
I would just quickly say that, and remember, because I was a young man at that time watching both the 2 movies and then the TV show. And I remember the quality of the stories began to wane as it progressed, as that season progressed. And I remember there was some mention then, and of course in later years, that McGavin was just frustrated because he couldn't get the kind of quality he wanted to maintain. And let's remember, this man had been in television since the 50s and had done film and everything. So he was a seasoned actor and a very good one at that.
Well, having recently watched all the episodes with my wife, she really didn't understand why I was so excited by Kolchak. So I showed her the 2 made-for-TV movies, and then we went through the series. And you can see where corners are starting to get cut halfway and 3/4 of the way through and all that. But the thing that stuck out was that McGavin never waned. He was always 100% the character, and my admiration for him grew as the quality of everything around him started to sink. Yeah.
But he turned that into a pivotal show and a pivotal character. It was one of the inspirations for the X-Files.
Yeah.
And I think the character is more popular now than he was in the 70s, because I can't talk to a horror writer who's not, a dedicated fan of the character. And
I have no idea what they're talking about. I have no clue.
That's the enduring part of something that was such a fluke, that all of those elements came together despite obvious obstacles, that they created something so memorable and so lasting.
But let me ask you about, we're going to do the finger war. Being a fan, how did you go about writing the character? I mean, it's, emerging writers all have their favorite characters, but from the dream to the reality is a journey. Did you write a bunch of other stuff first, and then they came to you because you're James Chambers, or what happened?
How I wound up having the opportunity to write Kolchak is around 1997, 1998, Moonstone Books obtained the license to publish Kolchak in comics and books. And I happened to be at a Chicago Comic-Con right after that, and they had a booth there, and a mutual friend introduced me to Joe Gentili, who's the publisher at Moonstone Books, and said, "Hey, this guy writes horror, you should talk to him about Kolchak." And so we had a conversation, and Joe and I got along well, and said, "Okay, send me some story ideas." So I sent him some story ideas after the convention, and he got back to me and said, "These are great, but we're going in a different direction." And they had another author lined up who was at the time a best-selling author. And honestly, that was that for no joke. Close to 15 years.
Wow.
On Kolchak. But I wound up writing other pulp characters, and through that, connecting again with Moonstone. I had written a Domino Lady story for an anthology edited by Ron Fortier, and that wound up bouncing several publishers before it landed at Moonstone. And on the strength of my story in that book, Joe asked me to write some other stories for the Moonstone anthology. So that I wound up getting to write The Spider, The Green Hornet, and Kolchak. I was asked to write a Kolchak story for one of the, I think for the second anthology they did. And at the time, it's really weird how these things work, but two of my good friends were writing Kolchak comics, Christopher Mills and CJ Henderson. Both people that I know. Chris and I were editors together at Techno Comics back in the early 90s.
Oh my goodness, Techno! Wow, that's a blast from the past. Okay, yeah.
And Chris and I had published a comic called Shadow House around 1997, 1998, a horror comic that we created. And I knew CJ Henderson. He was a New York author, horror author, pulp author. He wrote just about everything. Wrote for DC, for Marvel, wrote for various tie-ins and media properties, wrote a really great Monsters comic and things like that. And then I think around 2014, CJ Henderson very, very sadly passed away. And Joe and I had a good relationship at that time. So when he was looking for someone to bring Kolchak back into comics, he reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested. So it's, it was one of those things, I guess, if you're looking to get to a character you love or something like that, the takeaway is, be persistent and keep up the connections. Don't take the rejections personally. When Joe turned down my early submissions, I was like, okay, this just doesn't work for them right now. No problem, I'll move on. And coming back to it, we were able to connect on other projects and keep up a good working relationship, and it just led to more things. And now I'm actually writing. I have about 3 or 4 Kolchak projects that have not been announced really on my desk.
We have
you can announce them now. Right, you can announce them, right. Yeah, I got to pivot this. I've got to pivot this. We can come back to it for sure. But we started out talking about horror in general, and then we sort of became fanboys fan people for a moment
I was
there.
not involved in that at
Yeah,
all.
right. Okay, yeah. Just take off that shirt. No, don't. Okay.
Hey,
So
now.
let's go back to
Family show.
yeah, let's go back. Yeah, right. No, let's go back to a couple of questions, and the first one I'd like to sort of throw to Carol, and of course James. After Carol, you can pop in there. But I mean, horror, woof. What is horror? What is it? What is a horror these days to you? I mean, because I know when I was coming up, there were certain things that happened in the movies and the books and that you could find and experience, and then somewhere over the past 60, 80 years, there have been transitions. So what does a good horror story mean to you guys now? Carol, would you start that?
Yeah, well, let me start. My feeling is that there are many, many different subgenres of things that can be called horror, but to me, horror is a feeling or a mood. It's the kind of thing that makes the hair on the back of your neck tingle and stand up, and it could be the unknown dread. It can be the building dread. It can be, of course, the horrible guy jumps out with a chainsaw and such, and wears the mask and all that stuff. But to me, it's a feeling of disquiet and a feeling of horror. Is that silly to say?
No,
I feel like you can put horror in any genre, just the same way that many stories have mysteries in them. Well, you can put horror in just about anything. That's the way I look at it.
Okay. And James?
Yeah, I agree. Horror can mix with just about any other genre. I think that's our master plan, is where horror is going to creep into all the other genres and slowly take over.
What an appropriate word. Creep. Yeah.
We weren't going to tell him, Jim. We weren't going to tell him. Come on.
It's a master plan. I've exposed it.
I've exposed it. But I think there are so many subgenres of horror that it can be difficult to kind of pin it down. There's everything from pure psychological horror, where nothing supernatural happens, or it's all very emotional, to extreme horror, which is a popular subgenre where it's focused on often on violence and extreme situations and things like that. And for me, what the sweet spot is somewhere between like weird fiction and psychological horror. I love stories that have that element of disquietude. Things are askew. There's a sense of menace that maybe you don't fully understand. And I think the best horror are stories that take readers out of their comfort zone and don't let them get acclimated to whatever this weird, shocking thing is, and you still enjoy it. You don't want people to read something and be so horrified they never want to read another word you write. But you have to get readers outside their comfort zone. You have to get them thinking about things in a way that they may not have thought about before. That kind of either casts a dark light on things that are familiar and turns them into something fearsome, or uses dark stories to cast a clear light on something strong, positive or strong.
So would you in either one of you, would you consider an example of what you've just expressed to be something like the difference between, since we were talking Night Stalker, the Night Stalker with a vampire who didn't speak a line in the entire experience, had no dialogue. So a vampire is just basically moving through the story as this unholy terror, or, and I know this is one of Chris's favorites, the most recent film incarnation of the Invisible Man. I don't know if you saw that, James.
Yeah, I saw. I think they're two very different takes on horror, because in the Night Stalker, the vampire is really an enigma in a lot of ways. And the only way that Kolchak or anyone can get a handle on him is by looking at the old folklore, the old superstition, to kind of define what he is. But he's a monster, a creature of the night in the traditional sense, that he's a force for evil or for ill, for death. in the Invisible Man, it felt very different to me because that was far more rooted in a specific interpersonal relationship, and the technological aspect of that movie. And I hope I'm not spoiling too much for anyone who hasn't seen it, but takes away the sort of weirdness of the vampire, because we're never really sure from the TV movie why Janos Skorzeny exists or where he's come from. We get some hints, but he's really just this horrific force that's come out of nowhere and is preying on the city. But he's unique. There has never been another vampire in Las Vegas, and as far as anyone knows, there probably will never be another one. But when you go to the Invisible Man, once it becomes a technological thing, then there's potential there for anyone to become that monster.
There's a common denominator in both of those, though. Nobody believes Kolchak, and nobody believes the wife. And there's that element of not being believed, of having to question your own reality or push against the common reality, that I think also adds to a sense of horror. That, am I crazy? or was that a vampire? And one of the great things about Kolchak is he has very little doubt, but he's thwarted at almost every step with others doubting him, and that happened to the wife in the new Invisible Man, the modernized or whatever.
But that's an interesting point too, Chris, because a lot of times you just have to suspend reality in some way in order to get to the weirdness of the story.
Right.
It's just like a modern mystery story these days. So why didn't they just pick up the cell phone and call somebody? Well,
Right.
there has to be some reason why.
Right.
There has to be something unusual, something that makes people in a situation where they're not believed. They're taken out of the ordinary.
And I love that both of those two characters are telling everybody, and it's just so outrageous that no, and then you get to explore that part of it. Could I, if it's okay with you, I'm going to switch channels a little bit. Both of you have written for many anthologies, and I think that might be something that would be attractive to our audience of emerging creatives. It's kind of the chicken and the egg thing. Do you write stories and then an anthology comes by and you're like, hey, this would fit? Or do you write when you hear an open call or you're invited to? How does that work? And what would you advise emerging writers who are looking to participate in those kind of experiences?
Well, I do both of those things, and I even went one step further. I tend to write to open calls that attract my attention. I have some stories that for whatever reason aren't accepted, and then I shop for a home for them somewhere else. I see a call, oh, what's in the trunk, and I'll see if that fits. But I also got together with a number of my friends, and we started our own little small press called Writer Punk Press, and that's what some of those anthologies behind you, the Hideous Progeny and Merely This and Nothing More. We can come back to talk about the punk later, but we did that mostly because A, we wanted to get ourselves published, B, we wanted to learn more and get more experience with editing and such like that, and C, we're also supporting a no-kill animal shelter out on the West Coast because that's
fantastic. And you chose, for those, you chose applying horror and steampunk type tropes to classic literature.
Basically, we took classic literature, things in the public domain, so we wouldn't get sued, and we asked the writers to make punk stories out of them, any kind of punk they wanted: cyberpunk, steampunk, biopunk, diesel punk. There's so many kinds of punk, atomic punk, and to do something interesting with a story that wasn't what the original story did. But that was a great way for me to learn how to write a story on a theme. And I think that's an important thing, so that is one of the things that you mentioned, of course, writing to a particular call. I find it really interesting to do that. If you take something that's either a classic work and you're riffing off it, or you're following a particular call with criteria that you're supposed to follow, it gives you a framework to put your story in. Otherwise, I could write anything, You know, all of us could. We could write anything we wanted to, but how do you know where you're going? You know, how do you know what you're going to do with this story? But having a target, I find really helpful for writing the story. You
There
know,
was recently an open call for horror stories about trees, but the second paragraph said, we really have enough story about trees, so we're looking for like moss. and, and the light bulb went on. I was like, I got that story. James, chicken, yeah,
stories about fungi.
Yes, yeah. Hey, you're a fungi.
Starring Ryan Reynolds. Yes.
There you go. Chicken or the egg? Do you maybe you did at one time write to the open call, and maybe now there's a different situation? How did the anthology experience go for you?
I started out, before I sold my first story, I was pretty much writing whatever I wanted to write. I have an idea. Let me see if I can turn this into a story. Hey, here's a cool thought. Let me make this into a story. And I was doing that for a while and not really sending things out. And I heard about an anthology call for weird Western tales, and just had a thought, I could do something with that. And so I wrote a story that fit that. And actually, that's a funny story on its own. I wrote two stories because there was an element of historical fiction to that, and I misunderstood one of the topics on the list of things they were looking for. They mentioned the Barbary Coast, and they were looking for San Francisco circa the Gold Rush era Barbary Coast, and I thought, oh, Barbary Coast, Barbary pirates in the early 1800s, and not really understanding, why would that fit with weird Western tales? And wound up researching and writing a story about Barbary pirates, and then going back and realizing, oh no, I got this completely wrong. So I wrote a completely new story about doing more research and writing a story about San Francisco. And that was the first story I sold, and I sent that in for the anthology, and it all worked out for the good, because I wound up selling the other story that I'd written in error to another anthology that came up not too long after that. And so that was kind of, that's sort of like the chicken and the egg, I guess it's Schrodinger's poultry, because what's in the box, the chicken or the egg, you don't really know.
Nicely done.
Yeah.
I had written those, and I just, but most of my fiction, it's a split. It's probably maybe not quite 50-50. It might be 60-40 stories that I have just written because I thought this is a great story idea that I like, and then found a home for it, and stories that I've been invited to an anthology, or I've targeted an anthology. And sometimes an anthology call has helped me finish a story that I started but couldn't get a good handle on. And it was a story I started writing in the late 90s. It's actually the first story in On the Hierophant Road in the new collection. It's called The Price of Faces. And I wrote a version of that in the late 90s and couldn't really wrap my head around the language that the story required, because there's some odd things about the reality in that world that make the language different. You can't use everyday language. It wouldn't make sense in that world. And so I had to figure out, how do I write uniquely to this world? And maybe 10 years later, there was, I'm guessing at the time frame, I don't remember exactly when it was, but Michael Bailey was looking for stories, sort of science fiction-y, weird stories for an anthology, quali and new. And I knew Michael was very open to experimental writing. And so I thought, I bet Michael might like this story if I can figure it out. And with the time that had gone by and my time away from the story, I figured it out. And so that's one where an anthology call helped me finish a story that I had started writing. And so, there's that old writer's adage, never throw anything away. You write down a story idea, keep it, you cut 5 pages, keep it, you write half a story, but you can't finish it, don't toss it. You just never know when that stuff's going to be.
Open another file and dump it in.
Yeah.
If I could tease your book a little bit, how you solve the problem you brought up in that first story is absolutely delicious, because as a reader, you don't notice it right away. and you're thrown a little bit off balance, and then the pieces start adding up and it all falls into place. And then you understand the world and the story starts really kicking in. It was a delightful experience to find myself going through that. So nicely done, sir.
Oh,
That'll be 10
thank
bucks.
you. Yeah.
That'll be 10 bucks.
Checks in the mail. Do you take Venmo and PayPal?
If,
Thank you.
if we could mention a mutual friend of ours, all four of us have been delighted by the legendary Teal James Glenn. He was saying when he was recently on Tell the Damn Story that he has a penchant for the anthology he writes a story for, doesn't accept it, and then it's the next one he sends out or whatever. And that happens a lot. It's a good point to bring up for writers. How do you not get down on that? How do you keep going and keep sending it out? Everyone tells people to do that, but the how, how to separate the emotion and keep going and keep believing. I think they would really love to hear what you have to say about that. Do we start with Carol again?
We absolutely
that has
start with
become
Carol.
the tradition.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we will alternate. Yeah, I think there's two things to think about it in that case. One is that we are writing words on paper, and when somebody decides that the story is not right for what they're looking for, they're rejecting the words on the paper. They're not rejecting me. They're not rejecting Jim, or they're rejecting the words for that particular story. So it could be the best story in the world, but not what they want. And I try to tell all my friends the same thing when they've gotten a rejection, saying, but look at what they just said. It says in many rejection letters, this was great. It wasn't what we needed for our anthology. So, that's important to keep in mind. That doesn't mean it feels better. But the other thing I think that's important to remember is when we've written for a particular submission call, where like one of the anthologies that my friend Michael Ventrella was editing had to have the words "release the virgins" in the story. Well, that's a great idea, but can you picture how many stories there were that weren't accepted that had
Sure.
those words in them? And if you flood the market with those, everybody's going to say, I know this was just rejected somewhere else. So you have to tell yourself.
I think you edit that line out immediately.
Yeah, but you got to take the long view of the game, and if it's a story for a particular anthology call that's identifiable, tuck it in the drawer.
Yeah.
Put it on the list. Hold it for 6 months until they're not all over the market anymore, and then look around and see what you want to do with it.
Yeah. Sometimes the editing out of the original request strengthens the story. I had one for a Pink Floyd inspired anthology, and I had done one called Us and Them, and they really wanted a lot of bits of the song, maybe not direct quotes, but inferred. And when it didn't work out, again, you put it to the side, and 6 months later, another open call came, and I realized the themes of that story would work. And the more I took out of the Pink Floydish of it, the clearer the story became. I don't know if it'll, it's in submission now. Who knows? Maybe they don't like it either, and it'll become 40 different stories before someone flies home for it. But as an exercise, it's never lost. If you don't get published in that anthology, it's not lost. You've accomplished that. All right, now where do you go from there? And where do we go from there, Jim? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you go on to the next story. That's the perspective I've always kept, is I finish a story, I send it off. And, the best thing to keep me from sitting around chewing my fingernails waiting for a response is just to get started on the next project.
Yeah.
And, the way that publishing wheels turn slow, in the indie press in particular, they can turn at glacial speeds at times. Other times they're very fast. It's unpredictable. But I've had stories that I sent out and literally forgotten about for months, because I was just on to the next project or projects, and then it'll pop back into my head. Oh, you know what? I never heard anything back about that. Let me see what's going on. Let me check in or whatever. But rejection, it stings. It always stings. I think every writer feels that. And Carol makes a great point that what you have to keep in mind is they're not rejecting you. They're not rejecting your writing skill or necessarily your ideas. They're rejecting those specific words on the
Right.
paper, that particular story. And there are dozens of reasons that may have nothing to do with the quality of your story that would cause an editor to decline a story.
Right.
They may have just accepted one very similar to it in theme or in plot. It may not fit their theme. It may be, not quite right for the mix of what the balance, if they are putting together an anthology and they're running heavy on stories with a lot of action, and you submit a story with a lot of action, they may feel like we really don't have space for another action story. We need a quieter story. Or just, Christopher, the example you use, they may have too many stories about trees and now they want some moss to balance it out. So there's so many reasons that it's best to just take it in stride. It's hard, especially when you're starting out and if you're nervous about getting your work out there. And I have met so many writers over the years who are really insecure about those early submissions and just feeling like they're putting their heart out there, and they are, and we all are, and that's fine. And you should take it seriously, but at the end of the day, it is part of the process. And sometimes you learn from the process. Sometimes a story is declined because it's not ready for publication and your editor's doing you a favor.
Right.
The worst thing an editor can do for you is accept a story that isn't really ready.
Yep.
And not give you any feedback. And that, because then you're not learning and you're getting work out there that's going to represent your writing ability that maybe doesn't really speak to what you could really do with a little bit more of a push.
Yeah.
And so I think you always have to look at a rejection as a positive experience, even though that sounds counterintuitive, but it's part of the game, part of the business, part of the writing life. So the main thing that's always gotten me through it is just to keep my eyes focused on the next project. A couple of years ago, I took a shot with a novella at a very big publisher that had an open submission call. And I heard from a lot of people who got very quick rejections, and I didn't. And months went by and months went by, and I thought, oh, okay, maybe, who knows, this could be good. And then my rejection finally came in on my birthday, no less.
Ooh, ouch.
And, I'm sitting there looking at the email before I open it thinking, gee, it's my birthday. This could be the best birthday present ever. No, it's not.
Damn.
But the thing is, at that point, I had so many other projects on my desk that I just sort of like, all right, that sucks, but I don't have time to dwell on this. I'll do something else with this novella.
So keep busy.
Keep busy.
It provides us a great segue into.
But I have a segue too, so we're gonna have to split this one. You go first, and then I'm gonna jump all over mine too.
Now that is interesting.
Yes,
It puts the onus on both of you to go
Double
through that.
segue.
You got to have the segue to segues.
Yeah.
Well, I think that another thing that we do, or many do, is get involved in groups and associations that can help us improve our skills or just give us a sense of community, and even some feedback on our writing in occasion. And that's really brings us right to HWA, in particular the New York chapter. So segue number 2.
Well, segue number 2 is as you speak or after you speak about the New York chapter, it would also help, again, especially for emerging writers, to understand a little bit more about some of the elements that you feel, either one of you feel or both of you feel, go into a good horror story, whatever realm that is, psychological, gore, or whatever. So why don't we just sort of, you take either of those, whichever way you want to first.
Have fun. Have at it.
I have a good mishmash answer for this. Okay.
Oh, mishmash. I love mishmash.
I found HWA New York chapter accidentally through, as a matter of fact, our friend Teal James Glenn, who you mentioned previously. And I had met him at a convention. We were signing books together. And at that point, I was writing cyberpunk, which is kind of a dark, dreary, aspect of sci-fi. I wasn't writing horror. I didn't like horror. Horror movies scare me. Okay, I'm honest. I went to a reading that Teal did with HWA New York in New York City. Jim already had the chapter up and running. It was robust. There were lots of activities. I loved the readings. There were people making movies in the horror realm, showing them there. And I really was intrigued by the people who were writing this stuff that I actually thought was scary. And I started talking about my work with some of the people and all that. And somebody said, wait a minute, you turn children into bread dough and you say you don't write horror? Hold on, Carol, hold on. I said, okay, I guess maybe I do. Yeah. But so I was encouraged through meeting the people in the New York chapter to explore something that I had been doing without even realizing it. And there was a lot of good support. There were a lot of good readings. I started reading some of my stories in public, and which I had not done much of before, and getting a lot of great support through it. So that was a really positive thing to me, to find a group of like-minded people who enjoyed writing weird stuff. I just write weird stuff, and so Jim already had the chapter up and running at that point. So Jim, let me talk. We'll turn it over to you to do your mishmash.
Sure. Yeah. Mine's going to be a monster mishmash.
Oh, they did the mosh. They did the monster
Exactly.
mosh.
I think
pit.
Carol, at one of our readings where you read, Carol, I think that was part of my introduction for you, was that Carol says she doesn't write horror stories, but and she kept writing these great horror stories. And the New York chapter, there was an earlier iteration of it that sort of fizzled out, and then about 2013, another HWA member and I decided that we wanted to get something back up and running in New York. And we kind of started pulling it together, and just reaching out to people, doing events, appearing at events, and building a community, a network. And people started to kind of come and like it enough that they would come back the next time. And the readings that we did were a big part of that. We did events at a lot of places around Brooklyn and Manhattan. We used to have readings at the Lovecraft Bar down on the Lower East Side, the Morbid Anatomy Museum in Brooklyn, which sadly now is closed. Actually, so is the Lovecraft Bar. The Kill Bar at Times Square, also closed. So you may be sensing a theme here.
Yeah, don't invite us anywhere. No, I didn't say that.
But we tried to make
this is the last episode of TGA.
We tried to make these as engaging as possible, and so our readings weren't just here's a few authors sitting around reading from their work. It was Stephen Van Patten coming in with his DJ equipment and giving us musical intros and outros and interludes. It was trivia giveaway questions, where we would ask horror trivia questions, and the authors reading that night would often donate a book or two that they could give away to the audience. Mark Abbott has made a bunch of short horror films, and at some of our readings we were able to show those to the audience as part of the evening's program. The Morbid Anatomy Museum was a great place just for people to come and hang out, and we would serve like cookies and cake and wine and
ladyfingers, of course. Yeah.
Yes. One of our
made it very hard on her for typing later. Yes, I'm sure.
Tanya Hurley, who's the author of Ghost Girl and the Blessed series, would always bring these awesome custom cookies that were shaped like the Bride of Frankenstein or Nosferatu or something. And we had a great time. I think people saw that, and so they would kind of see that we were doing something productive, something positive, and we were reaching people outside the circle of other writers with those events, which is kind of the key. You want to connect with readers. So I think that's really where the chapter was getting its strength from, and we were doing that pretty actively up till March of 2020, when we moved all of our meetings online to Zoom, and we started doing online readings, and given our track record
of it all, right?
What's that?
That was due to the COVID
yes.
of it all.
Yeah. And due to our track record closing down real life venues, we were a little afraid about the fate of the internet.
We didn't want to be blamed for,
but It's been great. It's opened a lot of new opportunities for us. And I think we'll probably talk about this a little bit more later, but Christopher mentioned the Galactic Terrors online reading series, and it does feature local writers, but we've also been able to have writers come in from New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the West Coast, the Midwest, upstate New York, from all over the place. And that's been like a really great opportunity for us to connect our members locally with writers from a range of places, and we get an audience from a range of places. We've got people from many of those same places viewing every week, a month. I'm sorry, God, if we did it every week, but yeah, every month. But and that's one of the things that we discuss a lot. And even in those online readings, we have Q&A with the authors, and people are often asking, like, what are these elements of a good horror story, and what works and what inspires the authors to bring, write the kind of horror they write. I think there are two things you have to have in any horror story to really be effective. One is that you have to have really strong characters. The characterization has to be well developed and in depth, even if it's brief. The characters have to be relatable in some way or real in some way, so that the reader can share their fear, their horror, their revulsion, whatever it is that the story's about, or share the tension of their predicament, or care just that these
we have to care about them. That's the
Mhm.
same thing going through my head. We have
Yeah.
to care about them. Yeah.
And the other thing I think really important to do is establish what I kind of call it the baseline normal in that world. Horror works best when it's unexpected, when there's some contrast to reality. It's the thing out of place. And if you haven't given your reader a strong sense of what is proper and in place for that world, then it's hard to bring that disjointed sense to it. And so if you're going to describe, a cafe where all of a sudden a chainsaw wielding maniac bursts in, you've got to make that a cafe where the details bring it to life in the reader's head. It's like, oh yeah, this is just like the Starbucks I went to last week. There, somebody left napkins on the floor, and there's still a spill of, spilled coffee on the table I want to use, and that kind of thing. And then the guy with the chainsaw comes in, and it's all that more effective, I think. So, there are a lot of other elements I could talk about, but those are the two I think really are essential: is good characters and a very strong sense of setting.
I have two thoughts I want to just, based on what you were saying. One is I would also say pacing, in terms of building tension and suspense. And I absolutely agree with both of you, and I know Chris does too. Characters it's so important to us. The more you know them, the more engaging they can be, the more the audience is pulled into the story. And then that's the element that we travel with on that journey. And whatever happens to them, somehow we're connected to it, and it does have that effect on us. So I absolutely hear that. But yeah, I also think good pacing, because you can have great characters and you can have certain horrific elements and certain very natural elements, but if you don't build to these, move along these plot points and build that tension, so that when that thing happens, when that unexpected shatters the reality that we just became comfortable with, if they don't do it in the right way, then it's like, oh, well, I saw it coming, or what, and it throws us out of the story. So I do think that that's important. And I wanted to ask you, because we were talking about Kolchak and Dan Curtis and all of that before, characters, again, I think what you were talking about made me think of another attempt by the same team, or at least certain people of the same team, something called the Norales Tapes, which was a pilot for a show about another person who winds up chasing or encountering the supernatural, and it's an average individual encountering this sort of thing. And it was, the lead character was played by an actor named Roy Thinnis, and he was a writer and somewhat skeptical and everything. And I think one of the reasons that pilot didn't take off, it could have been other reasons, but I think one of them was that his character was kind of matter of fact, kind of regular, kind of, we've seen him a dozen different times. There was nothing particularly quirky or outstanding about him, as with Kolchak, who was so many quirky things and so many elements that made you kind of cared about him. You kind of wanted to get to know him. You wanted to hang with him. You felt sorry for him. All of those things. So I think, again, developing the right kind of character that really complements the story and really pulls your audience in is also very key in anything, but also obviously in horror.
The ill-fated remake of the Kolchak TV series in the 90s
Ooh,
is
you
a
brought that up.
fabulous example. Sorry. But it's a fabulous example of what you're saying, Alex, because they cast a rather handsome, polished British actor as Kolchak and erased any of the sort of everyman feeling of Kolchak, the quirkiness, or just, with Darren McGavin, you never doubted that Kolchak was quaking in his shoes when he was sewing the zombie's mouth shut, or facing the fear was credible,
palpable.
Yeah, and that was part of what made him interesting, is that every man, that he's just a not ordinary guy, and they totally lost that in the remake because they cast a handsome, dashing kind of personality who just couldn't play that part.
I thought they didn't know what made Kolchak.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we're talking about here is knowing that character is story and story is character, and knowing so much about your character that you don't put on the page, but you can take little bits of, like it's the hat, it's the rumpled suit, it's the like you said, the fear. Now McGavin, we had the additional benefit of being able to watch his features and his, what an expressive face. But how, both of you, please, how do you accomplish that as you're learning your craft just with the written word? That's right. Just explain how you put humanity on the page. No problem.
25 words or less, Chris, right? Yeah. Okay.
I was thinking 12, but okay.
Okay, well, 12 each. 12 each. I'll fight you for that last half a word, Jim. No, I think it's important to plan ahead and think about where are we trying to go with the story. So who's going to tell it? So, okay, now we know something about who it is who's going to tell it, but what's important about that person telling this story? And okay, that's the important thing about the person telling a story, but why does anybody care about the person telling this story? Do they have something in common? It's not a bad idea to give somebody a foible, just like we're saying with the Kolchak character. Give them something that people can identify with and feel a kindred that, oh, they don't fit in, I don't always fit in. That's an easy way, I think, to establish a little bit of rapport. And in a short story, you don't have an awful lot of time to do it. But what I'm in quite a number of critique groups, and one of the things that I find myself saying a lot is start your story out with the main character doing some sort of action, which is interesting, but also reveals something clearly about themselves. Having a big fist fight with 6 guys is not going to tell us anything about the guy. But if he's, protecting a kid who is being kidnapped by someone, well, then that tells us a little more about him. Just got to focus on some way to reveal a little bit about the character at the very beginning in order to make us, give us something to grab onto. You get 12 words, Jim. I used up all of them.
That was such a good answer. We're going to see what you can do now, Jim.
That's it. I have nothing to add to that. See, I did it in less than 12 words. No.
What she said.
Exactly. No, I think that's all very, very right on target and true. And I think a lot of it comes down to voice. Whether you're writing first person or third person, it's how you are telling the story is a big part of getting the fear across, or getting the unnerving aspects of the story across. And in short fiction, I typically find it works best where the point of view is from one character throughout the whole story. There are exceptions to that. There are exceptions to everything anyone tells you about writing, like this is the way to do it. There are exceptions. And there are reasons to break the rules, so-called rules, and do things differently. But a lot of it is voice. It's getting the story across in a way that appeals to the reader, that catches them the right way and sparks an emotional and psychological reaction. And sometimes that's comes down to using the right idiom or the right slang or the right turn of phrase that kind of brings a point across. And especially in short fiction and short horror fiction, there's a lot of value to be gained from misdirection, from starting a story out that could be going in more than one direction, or that you may be hinting is going one direction when really it's going to go another direction by the end. And that kind of thing keeps readers' interest in the story. They want to see, well, where is this going? I see several possibilities here. What's the one that really is? And if you can guess the possibilities that they may see and then give them one they didn't, that can have a lot of resonance with the reader. So it's there's a certain amount of literary sleight of hand involved in getting that stuff across. But it's different for every story because it really does come out of the character and the voice, and it's sort of what's going to be effective in this story, and the same technique might not work in another story because it's not the right fit.
So when Carol was asking the questions and you are talking about all the architecture of the story, when do those considerations come into play? While you're planning the story, before you've written word one, or after the first draft, while you're going to rewrite, a combination? What works for you, Carol? What works for you, Jim?
The answer is yes. Yeah.
Now she's used all the words. She's got another left.
Yeah, rest for you, Jim. You get 24. Yeah. No, I do try to think of those things ahead of time, but very often I will write through a story. I do a lot of dialogue is my main construction thing, and then I've got to go back with a trowel and layer on some of the stuff that I didn't put in there.
Seeded in, yeah.
So that's what I do. But Jim, your mileage may vary.
Yeah, no, it for me it depends on the story. There are some stories I've written, they are few and far between, where the full story just sort of sprang fully formed into my head and I sat down and wrote the story. That's really wonderful when it happens. That's really rare for me. For some other people, that's how they write. It's just, oh, here's a story, let me write this down. So that's really the main thing I think to kind of consider here, especially if you're starting out writing or you're early on in your career, is that every story could be different. You may find things that work for you that don't work for any other writers you know. You may find that you have to adjust your approach to writing story to story, or you may find that a rigid routine helps you. There's that old debate about people who outline versus people who don't. And, are you an outliner or not? And it's sort of like, yeah, sometimes I've outlined a short story. Most of the times I don't. I wait till I have the core of an idea. And then I usually mull that over until I've got the starting point, which is, where does this story begin? And you want to start the story as close to the end as you possibly can and still tell the whole story. And so once I kind of feel like I have that, then I feel like, well, what's it's almost like the declaration for this story. What's my first line? And your first line has to really be powerful. It has to be something that connects, hooks the reader, makes them want to keep reading. And so your first line has to have story in it. But just exactly what form that takes is, there's an infinite number of ways you can do that. But there has to be something that makes the reader think, oh, something's happening here, when they've read the first sentence or first two sentences, and feel like there's an unanswered question they want to get to the bottom of, or something, some promise that the story is going to fulfill. But I do rewrite. I do revise stories pretty frequently. I mean, I usually try to get through my first draft. My first drafts, I find, are generally pretty clean as far as the prose goes, but I like to tinker with structure. And so I'll rewrite stories and move things around and kind of play with new ideas.
Cool. I was going to just point out that one of the things that I like is, again, going back to characters, when when your character is not, as you were referring to the Brit actor earlier, perfect, handsome, blah, blah, when your character has certain physicalities that play into, and especially if we're talking horror or suspense, play into limiting them or limiting their chances against whatever terror they're about to face. Like the blind woman, in an apartment with a killer with a knife, and how can she possibly defend herself against this kind of person? I look at that. I was showing my writing class the other day a TV episode of a particular show, and it was not a horror show, but one of the characters had a certain physical challenges. They noticed the obvious one, which was a limp. But after an hour of watching this episode and discussing it, none of them had picked up on the fact that he couldn't turn his head naturally, that he had to shift his whole body when he went to look at somebody left or right. They never saw that.
Wow.
And I found that particularly interesting. So sometimes it's about not only thinking about your character in terms of their inner life and their thoughts and things, but also what goes on with them physically that could, as I said, play into the story as a weakness that they're going to have to somehow deal with, overcome, or be hindered by as they're trying to deal with whatever the terror or the fear factor is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's really intriguing because it also depends on who's reading the story. Somebody who had a physical limitation of their own probably would have noticed that. This is going to sound wrong, and I'm talking to the three of you gentlemen here, but several of my stories that I've put through different critique groups, I found an extreme difference in the reaction from the men than from the women. And some of the women picked up subtleties about the relationship between the man and the woman that did this, that, and the other. And the guys were like, why was she such a jerk? And I think it all depends on our point of view as both the reader as well as what we're presenting, the point of view in the story. So,
well, of course, Carol, that's because men are limited.
Oh, no, I didn't say that.
I did.
Oh, God. Oh, no. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and that's not the problem. The problem is the communication they're in. No, I agree with you and Chris in that happens. That absolutely does happen. And I would just abbreviate something that Aaron Sorkin said, and Chris and I have talked about this on occasion too, that when you're writing a story with two different characters on opposite ends of the pole, you have to sort of tune into both of them. You have to really get into both of those heads in order to write a convincing scene and to actually use these characters in an authentic way, not be heavy into one and kind of light on the other and not do your homework. So I think, once again, the guys who went, why is she such a jerk, were guys reacting as guys, as opposed to writers, or maybe even being more aware guys, limited guys is what they were being.
Oh.
I'm not
going to let that hang
there. Why'd you bring it up?
Yeah. And just to follow on that thought too, though, the other thing, once we define these really terrific characters that have intrigued our audience and make somebody care about them, we have to make sure that all the things they do for the rest of the story are consistent with the way that character would behave. So that's why we've got to think about them. We've got to know what they're like. Yeah. What are they afraid of? What are their strengths? What are their fears? What are their limitations?
Yeah. You have to ask the questions. You do like a character bio we've talked about a lot. I think I have 144 questions. Like if you're really stuck, you can go through those questions and pick and choose and answer that for your character. And the more you know your character, the more the voice becomes authentic.
I stopped at 40.
He was like, yeah, hell with you. You limited man.
I'll guess through the rest of it.
The other thing that writers have to do is they have to read or expose themselves, to the writing, the ideas of other writers. And I think that might be a great place for us to talk about both HWA and what they can offer, and Galactic Terrors, because the writers will read to you, right? So it's a great way of in a very compact amount of time, getting exposure to 3-4 different sets of ideas. So can we ask you to both talk about what a writer might find at HWA and then at Galactic Terrors?
I think Jim should get to go first this time.
Well, I think so.
Sure.
Even though he's a
Push me
man
in front
and
of the
therefore
monster.
limited.
Well, one of the things the HWA offers a tremendous number of opportunities for writers at every level, really. From if you're a new writer looking for feedback, we have a mentorship program. There are, forums where you can connect with other writers to set up writing groups. The HWA doesn't really run a writing group because there are logistical aspects to running a writing group that make it better for people to sort of find their own groove on that. But we also administer the Bram Stoker Awards each year, and those are the Edgars for mystery fiction and the Oscars for movies, whatever for horror. And part of that process is that members who have work that is eligible for an awards category in a given year often share that with the membership. So as an HWA member, you'll often receive, we call it the opt-in process, where you'll receive an email or something, or someone will post in the HWA forum or on the Facebook page that for any member interested, they're going to make available an ebook of their work or something like that. And so if you're really looking to sample what's going on in horror, then access to that is a great way to get a cross-section of the horror genre, because, and I think early on, the membership in the HWA was noted at around 1,200, and I think that must be a little out of date because we're up around, I think, 1,600.
Wow.
I think it's even higher.
Yeah,
something. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
incredible.
It's
I mean,
growing.
and that's in 10 years from 2011, when I got involved with the HWA membership committee, which I'm not that involved with now, but back then I was. Our membership was around 400, I think. And so in 10 years, we've grown by 1,400 or 1,500 members, which is amazing.
Fantastic.
So it's you can get a lot of insight into just the types of horror, what publishers are doing, what other authors are doing. A lot of the works that are offered are anthologies, which is great because then you get insight into that publisher's perspective, the editor's perspective, and you get a whole bunch of other authors that you can read about. So I think in that way, it's good. And even if that's not what you're looking for, there are always conversations going on in the HWA Facebook page, which in fact is open to the public. So if anybody out there is interested, you can, and you're on Facebook, feel free to join the HWA Facebook group. I think it's a group. That doesn't equate to membership in the HWA, but the page is public, and there's a lot of discussion on there where people will pose a question. Hey, I'm trying to write this kind of story. Does anyone have any expertise in this area? Or what have people found works in this? Or, someone will post something like, why does anyone like Salem's Lot? And if you want to stir up a controversy, go ahead and post that, because everybody likes Salem's Lot. But no, I just mean questions like that. And they're usually, I'm joking around, but they're respectful. It's people will say, what is it about this story that really makes so much people love it? What worked? I didn't get it. It didn't appeal to me. I didn't like it, but everyone else loves it. What did I miss? And you can just kind of talk through that kind of thing. So yeah, and there are, the HWA members in general are really nice people.
Yeah.
They want to help you. If you ask a question, you'll get answers from people. If you're looking to connect with other writers, you will be able to do it. I mean, you have to make the effort. You've got to get in, get involved, get engaged, participate in some way, whether that's volunteering or just being active in a forum or coming to StokerCon or whatever. But it's a really welcoming group that, part of its core mission is to help new writers. And so there's a lot of ground there that you can explore as a new writer.
Good.
Now, what about Galactic Terrors? I mean, that is a great way. And again, it's open to anyone who is, can type in youtube.com and then search Galactic Terrors, right? Can we talk a little bit about what that offers to someone who's interested in hearing other authors, hearing other stories, learning, oh, that's what that sounds like, and that's how that could work.
Sure. Well, for Galactic Terrors, our basic selection process is we pick a reader from our New York chapter at least, and some folks from outside of the chapter. Generally in the horror or sci-fi or interesting or weird, kind of wacky kind of genre. So there's all sorts of different things that you can experience by listening to the readers and the stories. And if you've never listened to a particular flavor of a horror or other story, it may well come up. The readers they get 10 minutes to read their story, and we talk to them for 5 or 10 minutes after that. And we actually developed the whole chit chat part afterward, because we did this in the pandemic to replace our readings that we used to do in person. And Jim was right; those were very friendly, warm, welcoming in-person events. So we decided, well, let's do the same thing. And Jim and I, we banter and chat the same way you guys do, and talk a little bit. And no, you never have fun.
Never.
Basically, Alex puts up with me, but
his check is in the mail too. I know. But it's great because you can hear different genres. You can hear the stories in the author's own voice, which is an intriguing thing. It's very different when you read it on the page, when you hear a different audio reader do it, or when you hear the author read it themselves. And so it's fun to experience that as well. And then we follow up. Typically we'll ask questions about that particular story, and then we'll broaden a little bit. And then of course at the end we always say, what do you have coming up? Because if you like this story that they read, you probably want to hear what else they've got going on.
Yeah, but I think that Q&A is really valuable. And we found out over the first year of Galactic Terrors that we were spending more time on the Q&A, and our sessions were running long, and we were getting more questions. And it seemed that people were really responding to that aspect of the program, that they enjoyed the readings, but they really enjoyed the opportunity to engage with the author afterwards. So when we launched year 2, we went from 4 readers per episode to 3 to allow some more time for that. And the questions we get, they're great. People are asking some really insightful questions about why an author wrote something the way they did, or what inspired them, or what kind of research they did, or does it connect to another work that, another literary work? Is there some kind of thematic connection there? Or how they write, their writing process. And we've been really fortunate with the readers that we've had so far, and in terms of getting a range of story types. We've never really had a session, and none of this is planned because we really don't know what people are going to read before they start reading. That they sort of complement each other, or they're different enough tonally or structurally that it's a real dynamic variety. And we've had poets come on and read a few poems, and that has been great.
I wanted to talk about Sarah Tatlinger. She came and read a couple things, some of it from the Devil's Dreamland, poetry inspired by H.H. Holmes. Thank you. I couldn't read the last little bit. And Carol knows I had this ridiculous experience of it just hit me like a bolt of lightning. And as I'm listening, I was just free writing all this. I never write poetry. So, but I wound up, I think I have 24 poems that tell a narrative tale. And it probably requires 10 or 12 more for it to be a novel in poetry. It's not going to be long enough for a novel. And it does indirectly feature my 2 detectives. It's all told from the killer's point of view. So they seem like, it's kind of like Grendel, where, Grendel's looking at Beowulf as a monster. This guy's looking at those 2 detectives as, what the hell is that beast? But it all came from her reading. I didn't expect it. I had no idea it was coming. And it really cemented for me the possibilities, the deep and varied possibilities that can happen from engaging in Galactic Terrors. So I thank you for that. But
Well,
you
I
know,
can't wait to tell Sarah that.
it's
I
a
mean,
great
she's going to
thing.
be really tickled. Yeah.
That's
I may have mentioned something on Twitter or something, but yeah. And then I had to read all of her stuff, and oh yeah. So we'll see where it goes. But
That's the beauty of really, you know, everything that you guys do, that the organization in, you know, HWA does, and even, you know, now that you're utilizing YouTube in this fashion, it's really opening up the doors for not only emerging writers but for writers, period. Because it's, to me, it's always a constant learning and exposing yourself to good quality material and even struggling material, because we can learn from it, we can grow from it, or sometimes we can be of help. So I think that, you know, creating a community that's nurturing that way is fantastic, and I want to thank you for it. And I also want to thank you guys for spending this much time with us because it has been a hoot and a half.
we
Absolutely.
had so much fun. We never even mentioned Halloween.
Mention what? Yeah,
Halloween.
right, yeah, exactly.
That's that old movie, right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
where can people find you or get in touch with you? That, you know, what addresses do you want to throw out there? Social media you want to throw out there?
I'm Carol Guyzander on everything, and my name is on the screen for those who can see it, but Guyzander is Gyzander. So that's me on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. I'm Carol Guyzander every place.
Yep. My website is jameschambersonline.com. And bear with me if you go there in the next few days. It's in the process of a redesign, so it's in sort of a pupil state, I guess, before it becomes a full.
As long as we're not doing
website.
Alien here with right under your face. And what about HWA?
Yeah, we have our New York chapter website is hwany.org, and that's for all the New York chapter stuff. We also have a Facebook page where you can find us, and we post a lot of fun stuff there. And the main, the mothership, as we call it, HWA website is horror.org. So that's an easy one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm on social media too. I think you can find me under James Chambers on Facebook and Mothman13 on Instagram and Twitter.
There you go.
Okay.
He decrypted, yeah.
Yeah, and folks,
just
yeah, go ahead.
Could I add one more link that I'd like to throw out there? Jim has done an awful lot more stuff with HWA than we even got to mention here, and I'm trying to follow in his footsteps a little bit because I have a job with HWA, a volunteer job. I'm one of the chapter program managers, where my job is to help people form new chapters across the U.S. I work in the U.S. We have one gal doing international. So, and I'm following in Jim's footsteps because that's an unofficial job he did where they had to give 3 of us the responsibility to do this, in his place. But in it, for folks who are interested in learning more about chapters or starting a chapter with HWA, chapters@horror.org is the website for that.
Would you repeat that again, please?
Chapters@horror. Oh my gosh, Jim.
Org.
Yeah. Okay.
Chapters at horror.org. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. You ever have those moments where you say, "What did I just say?"
Yes, and why? So if I got you, Carol, it takes 3 legitimate volunteers to do 1 James Chambers job. Got
That's
you.
right.
Got it.
Yep.
Got it.
Because
Okay.
not all of us can be
She's-
James Chambers.
She's exaggerating.
Yeah, sure she is. Right. Okay,
She
James.
is, yes.
Well, once again, thank you again for being a part of this, and certainly we will, kicking and screaming, drag you guys back here at some point so we can do more of this, because it was really great. I had a lot of fun. How about you, Chris?
Oh yeah, I just want to hear more and more about Kojak. So no, Kolchak. Put the L in there.
Yeah,
Or
right.
else it
Really,
gets
as
much
opposed to
bolder.
"Who loves you, baby?" Right. Okay. Well, okay then, Chris. As always, it's a thrill to be here with you, and we'll do it
Always an honor to
again
be in your
because
presence.
that's what we do. Thank you, everybody, and remember to continue to tell your damn story.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you very
much.
much, both of you. Happy
you.
Halloween. Peace, everybody.